So the watch,
Is it,
or the clock on
is
the
it
wall.
6 o'clock?
Yeah, we have
Yeah.
6 o'clock.
Yes, it is.
We've got Brian. So let's go ahead and call the meeting to order. And Brian, if you could please remind us what the rules are.
This is Brian. Happy to, Anthony. So welcome again to the Montgomery County MUD number 47 Board of Directors meeting for Tuesday, April the 20th, 2021. This is Brian Yates with Schwartz Page and Harding. As in prior meetings, I'll briefly go through the remote meeting procedures and then we'll perform a roll call. So to begin with, I need to remind everyone the meeting is being recorded as required by the Texas Open Meetings Act. Second, please remember to state your name before you speak, including the making of any motions. When you're not speaking, please be sure to mute your line. Third, we'll continue the practice of having a roll call to vote on each motion. After a motion has been made and seconded, please wait until you hear your name called and then respond with a verbal aye, a nay, or an abstention. Finally, we need to identify each person who's joining the meeting remotely this evening so that we can accurately reflect the attendance in the minutes of the meeting. I'll perform a roll call for the board members, followed by staff and consultants. When you hear your name or your company called, please respond by indicating that you're present in the meeting. Likewise, if you need to leave the meeting before it adjourns, please announce that you're doing so before you disconnect. Once I've completed the roll call for directors, staff, and consultants, I'll ask for any members of the public to identify themselves for the record. So starting with our board of directors, Anthony Cardell,
Present.
Paul Brown,
Present.
Laura Norton. Is Laura in the meeting?
Not now. No.
Okay. We'll mark her as absent for the time being. Cynthia Ullman,
I'm present.
Jennifer Ronk.
Present.
Okay, we do have a quorum of our board present in the meeting. We will move on to the Woodlands Water staff. Jim Stinson,
Present.
Mike Mooney,
Present.
Maureen Bourgeois,
Present.
Shelley Lawson Kennedy.
I'm here, and Laura's trying to restart her computer,
Okay,
so she'll be here.
Jeannie Scott.
Present.
Anyone else from Woodlands Water in the meeting? Okay, we'll move on now to San Jacinto River Authority. Ron Kelling,
Present.
Chris Meeks,
Present.
Ed Shackelford,
Present.
Matt Corley.
Present.
Anyone else with the River Authority in the meeting?
No.
Okay, we'll move on to Woodlands, to consultants for MUD number 47. Do we have any MUD 47 consultants in the meeting? And do we have a developer representative from Howard Hughes in the meeting this evening? Okay, we'll move on to members of the public. Do we have any members of the public present in the meeting? We need to identify you for the record as well.
I don't know if you saw that Mark Unland is here, but his microphone isn't working, so he chatted to say that he was present.
Okay.
I'm George
Any other
Newman.
members of the public present?
George Newman from MUD 46.
Okay. Any other members of the public? If not, that will complete our roll call. I'll hand it back over to Anthony to begin the agenda. Thank you.
Thank you, Brian. Item number 2 is receive comments from the public. If anyone has comments, please present them now. George, are you here primarily as an observer, or you have something for us? Okay, so I'm not hearing anything about any comments from the public, so we'll move on to number 3. Consider an act on a request for adjustments.
This is Jeannie, and I don't have any.
And this is Mike. I have nothing this month either.
Great, thank you. We'll move on to the consent agenda. Was there any request to move something out of the consent agenda?
Yes, this is Paul Brown. I'd like to move the San Jacinto River Authority Woodlands Division report out of the consent agenda.
Okay. Are there any other? Okay. So with the exception of the San Jacinto River Authority report, so items number 4 through 9, can I get a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Do we hear a second?
It's Jennifer. I'll second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Paul Brown, aye.
Cynthia Allman, I.
Jennifer Ronk, aye.
Okay, and Anthony Cardell, aye. Motion carries. We'll move on to the San Jacinto River Authority Woodlands Division report.
Yeah, this is Matt Corley. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the report.
Yeah, just let me get to the page. 22, right? Yeah. I have a couple of questions. One is that there's been some discussion, it didn't make it onto the agenda, but problems with our dam. Could somebody just give the entire board a current view of, how do we rank this thing in terms of importance / severity? What's the process that we're pursuing to make sure that, I'm not covered in water?
I'd be happy to, if that's okay. First of all, Bear Branch Dam itself is an intermediate dam. It's not considered a high-risk dam. About in 2009, so about 12 years ago, we identified, there's two issues right now with the dam. About 12 years ago, it was identified that the upstream face, which is a soil cement, was eroding. It wasn't to the point where it needed to be replaced, but it was kind of put on a watch list. And it was at that time recommended that the MUD start setting aside money for that one day that soil cement is going to have to be replaced. And it's kind of eroded over time, and it's to the point where it's going to need to be replaced. What the latest inspection also found is, and that erosion really doesn't have anything to do with dam safety or put the dam in a precarious or risk point of view. It's just that that means that the front face, where when it has water in its ways, it just erodes a little bit away, but the core is all still fine.
Okay.
The most recent findings that the consultant had, they did what's called a ground penetrating radar. What they do is they put a radar at the ground, and they screw it to find out if there are voids or not. Well, they found some voids, or they found some areas that are suspect of voids in the area that on the front face have concrete and it's reinforced. The problem with ground penetrating radar, it's not very accurate when you're trying to shoot through concrete and with rebar in it. And so what they're looking at now is ways to investigate below that concrete. And it probably is going to require cutting some holes, maybe 2-inch diameter holes or so in the slab, and actually stick a camera down there and see where the voids are. The data shows anywhere from a couple of inches, maybe even to a couple of feet holes in this thing. It's not, the dam is not at risk. And actually this is something that happens in dams kind of frequently, because you have water rushing over the dam and it kind of sucks the soil out from underneath it. So what we're doing now is there is a consultant that is putting a plan together on how to investigate these potential voids underneath the slab. And once we get that report, we'd be happy to report it back to the MUDs.
Right. Ron, as we look out and we're budgeting in the future here pretty soon, what kind of numbers are we talking about, give or take? I mean, are we 5 figures? Are we 6 figures? Or are we 7 figures?
7.
7 figures?
Yes. Back in 2009, the estimate was $700,000. And I'm positive that number is probably closer to over $1 million. I don't know, Ed, if you have a more recent number, but it's over $1 million. Yes.
Okay. So that would be $1 million to fix it, and then there would be other expenses related to the consultancies, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. So
Well, and to clarify, the 7-figure number is on the upstream side. And then there's still the cost for the downstream side as to what to do with the voids under the concrete. And we don't have a number for that yet.
So the repair, what the original repair we had identified in 2009 at 700, that's now at $1 million. And so what it is saying is then the downstream side of these potential voids, that would be on top of that. And I think that's all shared by 5 MUDs.
5
Correct.
months, right?
Yes.
Okay. And does that gets financed on our side or on your side?
Well, historically, what has happened is the MUDs have provided a contribution each year to the pot to do any maintenance or work, and that's what has been done historically. So
As maintenance?
yeah, so and that's why we suggested 10, 12 years ago to start putting money aside. But once we find out what the requirements are, then I'm sure we'll have to talk with the MUDs to see where the funding, where the initial funding would come from and how it'd be paid back.
Okay.
And Ron,
Great.
do we know the timing on the additional testing?
They're working on the scope now, so I would imagine the next couple of months. Would that be fair, Ed?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks.
We reported at the trustee meeting that our goal is to have good, reliable information back, hopefully July, to be able to factor that into the MUD budget meetings in August and September.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. I had a second question because I'm just trying to understand. I see here that Bear Branch Gravity Main is looks like it's complete or awaiting paperwork. What I'm trying to understand is, when we first approached this, I remember sitting in meetings and the number was something above $20 million, I thought initially, the initial view. I see we budgeted out there at almost 18 million for that project. And it looks like, if I'm reading this correctly, right, we're going to end up doing this for under $11 million. And I'm trying to understand that, that projected gap, which is pretty significant, right?
Sure. Chris, you want to take it or me? Okay.
So the Bear Branch Gravity Main, when we were selling the bond, we had not actually completed any preliminary engineering. So we were basing that actual budget, if you will, off of everything we have done prior to that in terms of CIPP. Also in relation to what the environment was. The Bear Branch Creek, if you'll call it that, is very wet and muddy. So we envisioned a lot of roads being built, temporary drainage and everything else. So during the PER and actual final design, the engineer that we had worked with some contractors to find alternate means to, one, CIPP the line, a little bit cheaper, obviously, and then find better ways around it. And then bypass pumping was a lot cheaper. So the budget was made before we actually had any preliminary design. Then as you can see, the $18 million budget will be just under 11 million at the end of the day. So about a $7 million savings.
And one other item I might add, it kind of tags on to what Chris was saying is early on when he said about the environment, we were very concerned about that line being at Bear Branch of having a flood or rainfall events that would impact the contractor and that they would put a lot of risk in associated with that. And so through that, they were able to manage their risk. And we got lucky that we didn't have any flood events during that period of time. And so that was another reason why the cost came in, the final cost came in lower. So.
That's terrific. Thank you. I just have one final question with regards to this. So over in the funding source, we got bonds, R&R, cash. Did you guys actually go out and bond fund the full project, or, you know, was that to be subsequent funding and it's on accrual against something else? I'm trying to understand, do we go out for 18 million, let's say, or 20 million in bond? And what, you know, where does the rest of it go, or where does that authorization go?
Sure.
I'm just trying to understand the accounting.
Sure. Chris?
Yeah, the bond was a bond sale from the 2017 bond sale, where we also did the belt press, the aeration basin, and then the gravity that you talked about. So right now, any unused funds still sit basically in the bond. They can only be authorized if the MUDs and the trustees do another supplemental agreement and approve use of those funds. For example, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
I was going to say, for example, some of those unused funds is what we're proposing to use on the consolidation study, as well as we will also be bringing back what we call the South Shore Gravity Main Project, which is basically a Y sewer line that goes around Lake Woodlands and through the golf courses over there. So,
okay, so you got someplace to spend it.
More maintenance that was already on the books, you know, just try to move it forward.
Okay, great, thank you.
Mhm.
That's all I have.
Thank you, Paul. So we're going to move on to item number 11, receive and act upon staff information regarding the upcoming MCAD Board of Directors election.
I am happy to report that no action is needed from MUD 47 tonight. Arthur Bredehoff expressed a desire to run for that position again. You may remember last election cycle, he did run. He was not elected. The township controlled the voting and the number of votes to get that position seated. But he has expressed a desire, and Metro Center MUD on Monday afternoon voted to inform MCAD that they wanted to have a special purpose district election, and Arthur's name will be put forth. So unless you have somebody else that you'd like to run it in that position, no action is needed tonight.
Good luck, Arthur.
Thank you, James. Thank you, Jim. Number 12, receive the attorney's report.
This is Brian. Under the attorney's report, I've primarily been updating boards on legislative matters, just a general overview of where we are in the session. We do have a separate item for that for this MUD. Laura had asked for a separate item regarding House Bill 4576. So I don't have anything under item 12 that we won't cover under item 13, except that another month to report that there's no change in the governor's proclamation regarding remote meetings. So I'll report on that each month to y'all, but we remain status quo on remote meetings at this time. That's all I have of a general nature under item 12. Happy to answer questions and also to move on to item 13 when y'all are ready.
Okay, I don't see anyone asking questions, so we'll go ahead and move on to the next item.
Okay, this is Brian again. Item number 13, discuss bills introduced in the legislative session, including but not limited to House Bill 4576, and authorize any action necessary in connection with the bills. So just to step back to 30,000 feet and then kind of drop down from there. This session, we reported got off to a pretty slow start with COVID and the security concerns after the incident at the Capitol in January in DC. So legislators were not nearly as active at the Capitol in the early, really month or so of the session. Thought that might have an impact on the number of bills that would be introduced this session. That has not turned out to be the case. In a session, you normally have 7,000 or so bills introduced. This session we've got, by my last count, was a little under 7,000, so really pretty close to an average session in terms of bill volume. They just introduced them in a much more compressed time period. Out of those, as we reported in previous sessions, generally only about 15% or less of bills that are introduced ultimately get or pass, so around 1,000 or so. So right now we're really in the weeding out portion of the session. Committee hearings are being scheduled for bills that have momentum. They're not being scheduled for ones that don't. And bills are making their way through the hearing process into the floor for votes and then over to the opposite chamber to work their way through. So very active time right now in Austin. We've got our two lobbyists with the firm. They're pretty much full time through the end of the session at the end of May right now. We, of course, work for our district clients on lobby related matters as well as assisting AWBD with their lobby and bill monitoring efforts. I have provided a couple of links to Shelley from AWBD for legislative summaries that they have put together. Those should have been emailed out to y'all. I think that's a good primer for directors who are interested in diving into a little bit more of the weeds on some of the bills that are being tracked right now. And then also provided Shelley with our internal bill tracker that we're tracking for the industry as well as for our district clients. That is a much more extensive list of bills that's close to 900 bills for those who are interested in getting really into the weeds on legislation. It's a PDF and there are hyperlinks by each bill. So if you click on those bills, it will take you to the Texas Legislature online. And on that site, there's very good search tools to be able to see at what stage each bill is in. Has it been referred to a committee? Has it received a hearing? Is it on the floor? Has it been, they have to have multiple votes before it's finally passed and it moves over to the other chamber. So that's a good resource if you want to look in more detail at some bills that are out there. Drilling down a little bit more, bills, kind of categories of bills that we're focusing on. There's a lot of election bills introduced this session that we're tracking that impact how elections are conducted. Of course, identification required to vote and mechanics of early voting and whatnot. We are tracking those because those will, of course, have an impact on our director elections. And if we were to have a bond election in one of our MUDs in the Woodlands or other district clients, a lot of those bills out there floating around, not sure what will ultimately be the legislation that's passed. So we're keeping an eye on that. A lot of bills introduced that relate to property taxes this session. Last session, you'll recall Senate Bill 2 was passed and limited the amount of tax revenue that a mature district can generate year over year to a 3.5% increase in the maintenance tax revenue. This session, instead of focusing on the revenue that a taxing jurisdiction brings in, they're focused on the appraised value of property, most especially on residential homestead properties. There are a number of bills introduced that would change the 10% increase cap for residential homesteads year over year to push that down. There are proposals to push it down to 5%, or proposals to push it down to 2.5% or 3.5%. There's at least one, I think more than that, proposals that would have some form of a freeze on the value of a home after you buy it, to not allow the value to go up during the time period that you own it. There's also some bills that have been introduced that would change how appraisal review boards and boards of directors of appraisal districts are selected to make one or possibly both of those boards be elected by voters as opposed to their current selection process. So we're keeping an eye on that. There's also another large category of bills or transparency bills. You may have received the AWBD update about Senate Bill 526. That was Senator Colcourt's transparency bill. The industry had some concerns about costs and implementation of some of the requirements in that bill. We did work out a compromised bill substitute that addressed a lot of those concerns, and that is now moving forward on the Senate side. So we're pleased with that. We got a lot of feedback from AWBD members to Senator Colkhurst and other legislators about the previous version. So we were pleased with that response from our AWBD members. There's some bills introduced on the transparency side that would allow for some form of remote participation post-COVID. Those are not getting a lot of traction at this point. That could change, but right now they're not getting a lot of traction. I've seen proposals that would allow for boards to meet remotely in some instances versus the current just blanket prohibition on remote meetings absent an emergency. And then others that would allow for participation by the public remotely, even if the board was meeting in person. So we'll continue to watch those, but hasn't been a lot of traction on that front. But some provision related to remote meetings could get added to another bill. You know, they call it Christmas tree bills that are moving to passage, and they'll add on some preferential language from other bills that aren't moving to try to get it passed. So that's always a possibility late in the session when things get a little bit crazy. But that's kind of a 30,000 foot view. There are some bills related to the River Authority that were brought up at the trustee meeting last week. Some bills that were introduced by Representative Metcalf out of Conroe. I think bills were 3116, 4575, and 4576. The 3116 just allows for commissioners courts to provide a recommendation to the governor for an appointment to the River Authority. It's non-binding, not really that big of a deal, doesn't seem like. But 4575 would require for the River Authority directors to be elected as opposed to appointed by the governor. Some folks have a strong opinion about that one way or the other. And then 4576, which if it were to get traction, could have a significant impact on the Woodlands, would require that the River Authority get voter approval to issue revenue bonds, which is a very unique, is one word for it, requirement, because generally revenue bonds, property tax bonds that are subject to property taxes imposed by taxing jurisdictions always require voter approval. Revenue bonds generally do not. Those are through contract on the participants, and the legislation would require for the River Authority to have voter approval to issue revenue bonds. It seems like through media reports that maybe what spurred that legislation was the lake area's opposition to the River Authority's GRP plan and the issuance of revenue bonds for the surface water plant. But the text of the legislation is not narrowed to the GRP division. It's just the River Authority. So it would impact the Woodlands division with bonds that are issued. We just talked a little bit earlier about the bond proceeds for the last bond issue related to major rehab and rehabilitation. So it would impact future bond issues for rehab and rehabilitation of infrastructure in the Woodlands, as well as we've talked recently about the feasibility study for consolidation of the wastewater treatment facilities. If that were to prove to be feasible and justify moving forward with that consolidation, there would of course have to be revenue bonds issued for that consolidation process, and the ability to issue those bonds would be significantly impacted if that legislation were to pass. At this point, in looking at the bill, again, we're talking about 4576. It does not appear that bill has a lot of momentum right now. It has not been scheduled for a committee vote or committee hearing, and does not have a companion on the Senate side. Generally, bills that are really teed up to pass, they have identical bills in both the House and the Senate to ensure that there's one version that can make it over quicker and then go to the other chamber. That's not the case for this bill. It's not to say it can't happen. We still got about 6 weeks left in the session, but right now I would say that bill is a lower probability of success bill at this time. But if there are directors that are interested in possibly going and testifying in Austin, should that bill get a hearing, we could coordinate with the River Authority to have Jim notified so that he could notify interested board members so they could go to Austin and testify. The one catch on that approach is that the legislature is fairly notorious for scheduling these hearings on fairly short notice. So you could have, a day or two notice of a committee hearing and need to be able to get out there to Austin to testify. But if your schedule is flexible and would allow for you to testify, if you had a strong opinion on that bill, then we could coordinate with the River Authority and Jim to have you notified when a hearing would occur, should it occur.
So Brian, potential mitigation of that would be the MUDs actually themselves going to their local public and requesting approval to issue a bond for more specific environmental effects. In other words, I don't know, pick something like the Bear Branch, whatever, that was financed by San Jacinto could in fact, right, be financed at the MUD level by going to our taxpayers and asking for approval for more specific financing, correct?
This is Brian. That's true. The issue is just going to be the timing and do you have enough lead time, since there's only a couple of uniform election dates each year. If there's a major rehab issue that comes up that needs to move more quickly, and then also the ability sometimes so there's timing, and then there's also the ability of the River Authority to get extremely cheap debt from Texas Water Development Board in the aggregate that is more efficient than each of the MUDs issuing its own debt. And so we may be more limited in our ability to access some of that Water Development Board funding if the MUDs are doing it on a piecemeal basis.
Right. Well, that's part of the implications, right? But from that standpoint, though, are we limited as to when we can run those kind of elections? If it's a MUD 47 issue and we want to market the bonds and get approval from our residents, can we sponsor that election ourselves directly?
This is Brian. Yes, but you can only do it on one of the two uniform election dates in either May or November. So I was just saying, if you have an issue that comes up, yeah.
So it is constrained. Okay.
Correct. Correct.
Brian, did I read it right that this these two potential laws, they're only for San Jacinto River Authority? Okay,
4575, 4576, and 3116 from Representative Metcalf. Yes.
okay, so they would have one, our river authority would have a specific set of rules and all the other river authorities would have a different set of rules.
That's correct.
Okay, just making sure I understand that. Any other questions? I know Laura, you wanted this broken out. Go ahead.
No, thank you. That's incredible. And thank you for pointing out it is just an SJRA law. It kind of exposes the hatred. I'd just like to take the opportunity to apologize right now for how late I was and that my camera is not on. But I didn't have anything other to add except to say thank you, Brian. That was very good summary.
Laura, you weren't very late. We just moved very fast at the beginning.
Well, good.
Okay,
Thanks.
any other questions for Brian with the potential legal? Okay. Not hearing any more questions, so we'll move on to item number 14, consider and act on approval of revised policy number Con 10.
This is Brian. So this is carried forward from last month. There have not been any changes to the language that was provided last month. We had a red line of the agreement that identified the language that was changing from the old policy to the current policy or the proposed policy. And this month it's on for action. So we talked about it last month. We gave a month for folks to digest the language, which is, we talked about last month, is primarily non-substantive, and this month is for the vote.
Brian, I don't think we really discussed it too much last month, and I'm reading this I guess memorandum, and it makes me a little uncomfortable. So there's some questions that I have about it. Like,
Okay.
We mentioned here about a purchase price, but we don't like define the purchase price. Is the developer able to mark up this work that gets performed by someone else?
This is Brian. So you're talking about the memo that's at the back of the form of memo that's at the back of the policy?
I'm talking Con 10, I guess
Yes.
this is section C.
It starts with
developer will
gentlemen
be-
and then pursuant to the rules, regulations.
Yeah, the district will be under no obligation to pay to such developer the purchase price pursuant to any such facilities construction. So, how are we determining the purchase price?
Let's see. So I want to make sure I'm on the right page
And
here. Let me
My
start
packet,
talking. So,
it's marked number 30,
okay.
and PDF page is 34. Adobe page.
Okay. You said packet page number 30, and what paragraph are we on?
C as in Charlie.
So the purchase price is the cost of the facilities that would be addressed in the on page 4. This is the form of the actual agreement between the developer and the district. So attached to this document, it says attached here too is a summary of the work to be undertaken, the properties to be serviced, and anticipated construction of improvements on the property. So attached to this will be the project summary, or what is anticipated to be the construction cost. And then from there, we have items on the agenda to consider the preparation of plans and specifications, and then to concur in the advertisement for bids, and then the bids are brought back to the district, and the district will concur in the award of the contract, and the TCEQ will be the one that determines what the ultimate reimbursable amount is of the infrastructure that is constructed. So there's a multi-step process that we go through to have the project be awarded. At the front end of the project, you have an estimate of what the infrastructure will cost, but you don't know what the final cost is because that's subject to competitive bid and what the district concurs in the award of that bid to the contractor. And then that is what we have for the construction cost. And then once the project is completed and we have final pay apps, and if you have change orders, et cetera, then all that gets included in the bond application, and that's brought to the board as a summary of costs. And that summary of costs will show what all is to be included in the purchase of those facilities. So if you have any developer interest, and if you have a land that you're buying, that's all going to be itemized and approved by the board at the summary of cost phase when the bond application report's being prepared. I know it's a little bit of a long-winded answer, but it's a multi-step process to get to that final number.
Okay. I just want to make sure I understand that, what we're committing to here.
Right. And what you're limited by the rules of the TCEQ. So you have, it's subject to just market limitations on the competitive bids, and then it's subject to TCEQ approval. They may disallow something for some reason or another. And so that's going to limit what the actual reimbursable purchase cost is. And then once that's approved by the TCEQ, you have limitations. If there is any developer interest, that's run at whatever the interest rate is on the bonds once they're competitively bid and awarded to an underwriter. So that will limit the developer interest portion of the quote unquote purchase price. So there's both market variables, and then there are also regulatory limitations that will come into play to determine what that final purchase price is.
Okay. Thank you, Brian. And I also had questions about paragraph I. So my understanding is that sometimes our engineer works for the developer. And I just want to make sure that we're doing everything we can to protect our district. Say it's a bad engineering design, or, our engineer gave the thumbs up. Is it a good idea to strengthen this paragraph so that we make sure that we can pursue someone that isn't our own engineer if we can?
You're talking about if there is an issue with the construction of those facilities, if it's someone besides the district engineer.
So just last month, or maybe the month before, we talked about how a sewage pipe underneath, I think it was Woodlands Parkway, failed, right? Because it wasn't constructed properly. It wasn't sitting on the right type of sand or sand. So I don't know if that was a design flaw or if it wasn't built per the engineer's design. But either way, the engineer's supposed to be signing off on this, that yes, this was built per our specifications. If our engineer is signing it and signing off on it, that could be an issue when we accept this infrastructure into our system.
This is Brian. I don't see that necessarily. We can go into more detail on some of this in closed session if you'd like. At an initial level, I don't necessarily see in a difference between whether the developer has a different engineer than the district does, because at the end of the day, that design engineer has a responsibility to properly design those facilities. And, if they don't, then, they could be subject to liability, regardless of whether that engineer was the same as our regular district engineer or different. I'm trying to think. I mean,
Well,
is my
we
understanding
do have a
correct on-
separate contract with our engineer, with our own district engineer. So to the extent there are limitations of liability, specific limitations of liability with our consultant engineer through that consulting engineer contract, then those would certainly be applicable.
Right. I mean, I just see, and I'm not trying to say our engineers aren't doing a great job, but let's say they hire our engineer to design this, and we try to come back years later and say, well, this wasn't properly designed. But they say, the developer can say, well, your engineer designed this for us, so it's your fault, right? That's my concern.
Yeah, this is Brian. I mean, it'd be the same issue if we had a rehabilitation of a district piece of infrastructure, and there was no developer involved, and our engineer designed it, and we put in some replacement line, and then that line failed. We would still have a claim subject to whatever limitations were in their consultant contract. The district would still have the ability to pursue a claim against its own consultant engineer.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? I mean, it would be the
We
same.
can sue our engineer anytime we want if we wanted to.
This is
If
Mike.
the engineer was responsible.
Right.
Anthony, this is Mike. A lot of the items that you're referring to, for example, that failure on Flint Ridge, the bedding was supposed to be, or was called out to be stabilized shell. No longer use that. The pipe was called out to be truss pipe. They no longer use it. They're just inferior materials. And this was put in the early 80s. One of the things we did notice is there was limited to but also the pipe is inferior. At the time it was constructed and designed, it was the state-of-the-art pipe. As it wore on and aged, it didn't fare well.
so my question is, we do have requirements, right, for the insurance that must be maintained by our well, in this case, contract employee. So whoever we're using, if they're not an employee of the organization, but they're a contractor, they're required to maintain and have in place continuous insurance, correct?
They typically have errors and omissions insurance, either they
Right.
have a policy or they self-insure against it, one or the other.
Yeah. Well, we allow self-insuring?
For engineering errors and omissions, I don't know. I need to look and see.
Yeah, can we take a look at that? I mean, I've just, my question is, it's not just a individual who's incorporated as an LLC and, we don't have a standard for insurance. Just a question.
Okay.
Yeah, this is Brian, and Anthony, just to kind of circle back around to your point. I mean, when things go awry, if they're actually, something rises up to litigation, you're going to have finger pointing in any number of directions. I mean, think back to what happened with the surface water line at Grogan's Mill. You know, I mean, there were claims against contractor. There were claims. I think wasn't the Ron, help me out. There were claims also against the engineers and the material
Construction
makers.
manager.
And, I mean,
Yeah.
yeah.
We sued everybody.
Exactly. And so that's what's going to happen. You're going to have lawsuits against everybody, and then they're going to be pointing fingers at everybody else. And so it doesn't really, to me, off the cuff, make a lot of difference if the engineer was also the district engineer as opposed to just a separate third-party engineer. A developer may, point to whoever the engineer was, regardless of whether it also happened to be the district engineer. That wouldn't surprise me at all.
Thank you, Brian. I just wanted to make sure we had covered our bases there. Then on page 3, it says that this is agreement for maximum term of 15 years. Are we approving this project by project, or if we sign this or approve this, we're basically giving the developers free reign for 15 years?
That's on a project by project basis. So each letter agreement, which is what is page 4 for the form, each project has its own, what we call a content agreement, which is this page 4 of 4. And each one of these, instead of dumping all this language in pages 1 through 3 into that page 4, the page 4 just refers back to all the requirements of pages 1 through 3. So if you have one that's dated, April 20th, 2021, then that agreement, April 20th, 2021, is for a 15-year term, which is standard. I think we talked about that a little bit. Maybe not in this mud, but in some of the ones last month, that's what's standard in the industry for a term on these construction reimbursement agreements.
Right. So I just want to make sure I understand it. It's 15 years because they're more like usually building an entire neighborhood in acres, like we're doing for our potential project coming up.
This is Brian. So it depends on the project. It's not necessarily a global project for 100 acres or something. It could be something smaller than that, but it depends on the project as to what period of time ultimately is necessary to get from yes, let's move forward with this project, to going, putting in the infrastructure, and then building the taxable value that's necessary to entitle that developer to reimbursement. And just over the years, 15 has kind of become the benchmark for these types of agreements for a developer to go and put in the infrastructure, create the taxable value that would entitle it to reimbursement. In the Woodlands and what you've got now, is it likely going to take 15 years? No, it's not. But you never know. Market could turn. I mean, hopefully not, but we've seen it happen before, and it take longer than anticipated. So that's just more of a market standard, and that's why I put that in there. I mean, if y'all want it shorter, we could do that, but that was the rationale behind that revision.
But also, Brian, I think it's important to emphasize this is a more or less a template that could be tweaked depending on the project that you're looking at. This is a template that we try to standardize across the MUDs, but it certainly could be adjusted on an individual project basis, depending on the details or uniqueness of that project. Is that correct, Brian?
This is Brian. That's a very good point, Jim, that, that's probably a better way to handle it on a individual project basis is if you, for whatever reason, want to have a more limited period of time to handle that in the letter agreement, that's the page 4, to have, notwithstanding any other provision of the content policy, the reimbursement period is X number of years, and you handle it as a one-off basis that would trump the overall generic policy.
Yeah, one of our reasonings for approving these kinds of projects is for, we've already issued bonds. We want this built out so that we can receive the property tax revenue. And if it's taken them 15 years to build it, it doesn't make a lot of sense. So I'd be more comfortable if that number was reduced.
Yeah, and again, we can do that on a case by case basis. I think developers' interests are certainly aligned with that as well. They don't want to float the note on infrastructure for a long period of time either, because they're capped out at the TCEQ on interest at maximum of 5 years. So to the extent that they construct infrastructure and it takes them longer than 5 years to create the taxable value necessary to be reimbursed, they're essentially floating an interest-free note to the MUD that they're not going to be reimbursed for once you hit that 5-year mark. So their interests are certainly aligned with getting it done in a shorter period of time than that.
Thanks, Brian.
And just to be clear, Brian, and projects can only move forward once we've given our authorization. Is that accurate?
This is Brian. That's correct. You have to approve and multiple approvals. So it starts with the content agreement. That's where it starts. But then after that, they have to come to you to get concurrence in the authorization to advertise for bid, to award the bid, to approve pay estimates, approve the final pay estimate, to accept the facilities, move forward with the bond application summary of costs, to approve the summary of costs, to approve the final application to the TCEQ, to approve once you get TCEQ approval, to approve preparation of the offering document, approve the sale of the bonds, award of the bonds. And so, I mean, there are a lot of steps that the MUD is involved with to finally get to payment to a developer for infrastructure. It's not approve a content and it's over. I mean, there's a number of steps involved.
That is the most clearly I've heard that explained. So thank you for that, Brian. It's tremendously helpful to better understand how the process works kind of from the beginning to the end. So thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Brian. Are there any other questions? I apologize. I think my internet connection isn't working very well.
Just sounds like you're slurring, Anthony. Did we lose him?
He looks frozen.
I don't know.
Looks,
You got something in your rules for when the guy in charge is frozen?
yeah, when are we going to go back to face-to-face meetings?
Where'd he go?
Next director up, Paul.
Yeah, that would be Paul, would be our presiding officer in the interim.
Okay, so Brian, what do you want me to do? Say we're back online with the meeting, or we don't have a quorum?
Yeah,
do we? Or do
we
do.
were
Okay.
going through
Mhm.
discussion on item number 14. So if I think we were closing out discussion on item 14, and if we don't have any other questions, then we can consider a motion on the policy.
Well, I'll move that we approve the policy.
I'll second
I'll
it.
say, all in favor? Paul
I'm
Brown,
Lauren Norton
aye.
and I say aye.
Cynthia Ullman, I say aye.
Jennifer Ronk, aye.
Paul Brown, aye. Arthur, I was gonna call on Arthur. He's not on the board anymore. In place of Anthony. Anyway, so we're approved. Motion carried, right? So Brian, what's next?
Well, consider an
next-
act on a
Yep,
resolution
go ahead,
opposing.
Lauren.
Yeah, consider an act on a resolution opposing Lone Star's proposed increase in DFCs. And since we put this on the agenda, I asked for Jim to put it on. There's been a rethink of the whole thing and an effort or desire on our part to get everybody that's involved in this or that could be adversely affected by Lone Star's approach to DFCs on board with our resolution. And that includes the township and even East County cities and as well as all the MUD. So we have some ideas to change it already. And I'd like for us to just push that off then to next month. So that's the status of that.
Laura,
Yes.
you're in the middle of this probably more than anybody else. Why do we need this? I mean, is this, I mean, you know, this dueling banjos thing with Lone Star's been going on really most of my lifetime.
Yeah.
It feels like.
Yeah, I
So what
appreciate
is it
that.
we're trying to accomplish? That's all I'm trying to ask.
Yeah.
What are we trying to accomplish?
Well, I agree with you in that this has been going on for 2 years, but what's happened more recently, of course, is Houston Chronicle, Conroe Courier, Community Impact Magazine have been giving this coverage. And the reason is the big change that happened last month was finally the GMA 14 board came up with a DFC statement, desired future condition statement. And what happens after they come up with that statement is it goes to the TWDB. I just learned that just about an hour ago, because this is the first time I've been through this process too. But TWDB will issue the language that goes along with the DFC that the GMA 14 board approved. And then they will start a 90-day comment period where they receive public open comment, maybe town hall meetings. I envision, like, I know you went to the town hall meeting at the library there. Gosh, it was a couple of years ago. It was definitely pre-COVID. And we told the Lone Star board then how we residents of the Woodlands feel. We were united. Anyway, that's what is going to happen once that clock starts ticking. It's in our best interest to be a united front to fight against subsidence and lowering water tables that cost us a lot to retool our wells and so on. All these things. And we thought that, and we is, gosh, it's everybody. I mean, I've been talking with MUD directors from 46, 7, 1, with township people. And I'm even getting to know, South County, other MUD folks that are engaged in this. So if everybody on our side agrees to a kind of a resolution, we think we will be more effective and be successful in fighting Lone Star. So.
Okay. I don't disagree with the objective, quite frankly. I just was wondering why,
Why
you know,
now?
well, it just seems to me as I look at it in a macro, right, over term, right, that the only real change that's going to happen here based upon the meetings that I've listened in on, watched, et cetera, is that they're gonna storm this thing, and basically they're probably gonna pick something up higher than we want at some point. And I just, you know, and really the only way we can change things, it seems to me, is that we've got to mobilize people to want this to change with a focus on two continuous election cycles, right? We have to literally elect enough directors of that board through, you know, on two separate occasions, right? And maintain them in place to actually create change. And I'm not saying we shouldn't go out there and, you know, march for what you're talking about. I'm just, you know, I sometimes get confused by it and wonder, you know, is there not a better way to try and look at resolving this issue, you know, at a state level? It just strikes me, quite frankly, and it has struck me from the very beginning that the only way any change is going to happen is if we make something very unpalatable happen for the state. And that's something that we don't, most of us don't ever want to happen, but you know, maybe what we have to do is go back to surface water as well, and take 10,000 gallons of water from the GRP every year, which will have the effect presumably of making them insolvent. And they've got a lot of bonds at risk. And as they said, as Crazy Eddie said in Brooklyn years and years ago, you know, money talks, nobody walks. And so how do you get people's attention? And frankly, it'll be if those bonds are at risk, quite frankly.
And they are, right?
Just my thought. Well, they're not at risk right now, but we could make them at risk because we're the biggest GRP user in the county, right? And of the facility.
There was one time where the checkbook up at the GRP had less than $100,000 on it in it, you know, without hitting into the debt service reserves and notifying their bondholders. So we did come close once, and we'll see if we do again. But you're right; it's that's where that'll be a turning point for sure.
Well, I'm fine with whatever you want to sign in support of that. I don't know. So we move forward on that in the next meeting then?
Right. So thanks, guys.
Okay.
So general manager's report, Jim?
Yes, thank you. A few items to highlight from our trustee meeting. We did talk about and actually vote on the wastewater treatment consolidation feasibility study. The SJRA was authorized to move forward. We did report at that meeting that we had met with the Woodlands Township Director Reeser and Director Chairman Bunch and their upper management, along with SJRA and our staff, and the township is supportive of this effort. They offered some assistance and encouragement. So that was a good meeting. Also,
hey, Jim, could I just make a comment? I know that they offered us a potential site. Okay, my understanding is that site is in a different county. Okay, and I don't know all the legal ramifications, but one of the things I think is that before we go, as we go through this process, that one of the first processes should be, elimination of certain things if there are clearly problems with the direction, and that has to do with the legal side. I don't know what all the legal ramifications are, or if there are any, of moving Montgomery County waste into Harris County, which is the other side of the Woodlands. And, you know, is that, you know, a stop sign right there of that option? That's all I'm suggesting, is that we have our attorneys look at that and make comment on it, or if San Jacinto does that. I don't care who does it, but we should do it, because right now in the structure we're in, we would be moving wastewater under their proposal over to Creekside,
I
right?
agree with you. It sounded like a wild idea. And so I did, 1-800 call your engineering friend that is a certified engineer in Texas. And she said, yes, you can cross county border with waste. So I don't know. Look at Ron.
Well, I'm just saying our attorneys should opt on that, and then if we can, then we can.
Yeah.
Jim, would you like me
Yeah,
to
this is,
respond to that?
go ahead,
Go
Ron.
The San Jacinto River Authority does not have legislative powers to operate in Harris County other than by agreement with the city of Houston east of the San Jacinto River. So in order to make this option work, there would have to be some agreements between us and Harris County, City of Houston, to allow us to do that. The other challenge, and this is just very, very preliminary, just looking on Google Maps and GIS, looking at the site that was offered, a considerable amount of that site is either in the 100-year floodway or 100-year floodplain or 500-year floodplain. And so there's going to be some challenges with that site. So to your point, Paul, before we spend a whole bunch of money looking at alternatives to go there, we're going to have to look at some other issues first before we do a detailed analysis of that site.
Another site proposed by colleagues was kind of over by NOAC, but that also, his office is at Precinct 3. That also, I bet, is in the floodplain that you're speaking of.
Yeah, the problem in as y'all know, in Montgomery County is if there's a lot, we need like 25 or 40 acres. If there's 25 or 40 acres of land available, more than likely it's developable, and somebody's got their tags on it, or it's parkland, and there's a reason it's parkland.
I see.
So, but we're gonna look at all. We're gonna look at all.
Well, good show. That was a better discussion than we had at trustee. Thank you, guys. Thanks for the question, Paul.
The other thing I reported is several of our MUD directors and township directors have been leaning on the San Jacinto Regional Flood Planning Group to add another voting member. That effort was successful. They have added a upper San Jacinto watershed voting member to that roster. That person will be selected, I think, in May. But if you remember a month or so ago, we had an agenda item on all 10 MUD agendas to support Neil Gaynor in the event that effort was successful. So I will be preparing a letter on behalf of our 10 MUDs recommending that Neil be that person for that upper watershed voting position. We are continued discussions with TACUS regarding modifying construction techniques, notification protocol, reimbursement to the MUDs for damage to the water facilities. We've had a couple of meetings with them. The most recent meeting was with our attorney and their attorney. I think it was productive. We seem to be going right now in a positive direction. I've got another meeting set with their chief financial officer tomorrow morning. So I think we continue working on them to get this issue in a position that we can work with and that they can live with as well. We talked earlier about the Bear Branch Dam. We talked about that also at the trustee meeting. I won't redo that. I'm still working on the concerns of 2 residents regarding AMI pole installations. I did get some feedback from the township that they might entertain having those poles on parkland instead of where they are now. So we'll be looking at that option to see if it makes sense. The HART monthly report is in your packet if you've got questions on that. And then, of course, Ed Shackelford, glad to have Ed on board as a replacement for Ron. And there's one other thing that I would like to review with you. Maureen, can I share my screen? If I click on it, will that work?
Yes, you can.
Let's see. I'm going to put up a map here of the bear. Can you see my pointer moving around on this map?
Yes.
Yep.
Here is Research Forest Drive. Here is the Woodlands High School. We've been talking about doing drainage improvements to Bear Branch that would open Research Forest Drive up during major flood events. It has been underwater and not passable from about Cochran's Crossing down to
Shadow Bend.
yeah, Shadow Bend, exactly, Shadow Bend, many times. So doing some modifications along this portion of Bear Branch and this portion of Panther Branch, we could lower the water surface elevation by about 2.3 feet in this area, this circle here.
That's significant.
About almost 3 feet in this Capstone neighborhood that stays underwater for a long period of time. And what I wanted to emphasize is Mud 47 along here, this south side of Bear Branch, this is all Mud 47 property along here, up to the YMCA. This and what's kind of bringing this to a head is we just received notice that our application is going through and going to be heard by the Texas Water Development Board in May. So that's good news. And now we're kind of looking out to look at partners for this. There's going to be a lot of benefit from the Shadow Point area through Quiet Oak all the way up to where the YMCA here is from Mud 47. This over here is Mud 67. The red here is Mud 7. They're going to see a huge improvement in drainage through this area and up along the Panther Branch area up here. For Mud 47, I know there's been some homes severely impacted in the Sky Terrace and around the YMCA area. I think in Quiet Oak during past storm events. So I kind of want to give you a heads up that we're going to be looking at this a little more closely to see, first of all, if it might make sense to have Mud 47 participate in this in some way, and what the benefits would be to your residents to help encourage your participation. It's about a $10 million project. We're going to get about $1 million, a little over $1 million in grant funding, and then a 30-year 0% interest loan, if you will. It's actually a bond sale, but money doesn't come around very often. You get a 30-year term at 0 interest. So
just do it. I mean, if I can get a piece of that action, I'd love to take it.
Well, I can finally say today, I think we're on a path to get it, but then Mud 67 is certainly going to look for some funding partners, participants in this to make it more fair, because it's a widespread improvement with research and what's going to happen along Bear Branch. And anyway, we'll be talking to others about the participation in this. And I just wanted you to see it tonight, and you'll be hearing more about it.
That would be terrific.
That concludes my report for tonight.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it. And just a FYI, Takas broke my water pipe, but they fixed it the same day. So That's good. Are things getting better on that front, Jim?
You know, we had a period where the breaks were minimum, but I heard yesterday there were 6. So,
Jeez.
Hey, just for everybody, just so you're aware, if anybody asks you about it, there is a company, and I got the letter yesterday actually, and it piqued my interest. An insurance company that's offering, coverage for that type of damage. I don't know why it's so coincidental, I guess because of everything in the newspapers, but the cost of the insurance, I haven't read down the insurance, but the annual cost that I got in the letter was $60. I mean, you can't get a plumber today who knows how to hold a wrench for $60, right?
Yeah.
Just information.
Well, thank you, Jim. We'll move on to item number 17. Consider an act on AWDB district voting member representatives.
and in your packet is a document that we received from AWBD. And I'll just kind of summarize what they're asking is that each of the MUDs, not just our MUDs, all of their member MUDs designate a person out of the 5 MUD directors to vote on the district's behalf. And I know it's for the upcoming amendment to the bylaws and the election in June. I don't know if this process will continue beyond that, but at least for these 2 upcoming elections, if you want to participate, they want you to designate only one of your MUD directors to cast the vote.
Is anyone planning on attending the conference this summer?
And you do not have to attend. This is going to be an electronic vote. You do not have to be present.
Right. Well, I'm just thinking, if someone actually attends, they might know who's on the slate a little better.
Understood. Yes.
So no. Okay. Anybody want that choice?
Since you can't see my face, I'm shaking my head no.
Okay. I'll do it. It's been a while since I've gone to anything AWDB, but I think I still know who some of the players are over there. So I can cast that for our district if we need to.
Okay.
Well, Jim, you're on mute. Okay.
Motion and action, please.
Okay.
I make a
Can I get-
motion that Anthony is our voting representative for AWDB.
Second, by Norton.
Thank you, Jennifer. Thank you, Laura. All in favor, say aye. Well,
Aye.
I guess
Aye.
Yeah, Paul.
This is Cynthia, I.
Jen, aye.
Laura Norton, aye.
Paul, aye.
All right, Andy Cardell, aye. Thank you. Motion carries, and we'll move on to our next item. Receive update on proposed FM 1488 development.
And I don't have any updates for tonight. And I did visit with Danny briefly the other day, and he indicated he was going to get back with me, but never did. So I guess the answer is no update tonight.
Receive the Woodland Water Trustees Report.
Well, very good. This is Laura Norton, and we talked about the wastewater treatment plant here, actually more than we did on the trustee board, I think. So you know more about that. That was one of the big updates from the trustee meeting. The other one was us moving forward with the GMA 14 DFC, and thinking about what the trustee board brought up, kind of what Paul is getting to when he talks about what are we going to do. And it is true that we need to have more input in the election. By that, I mean our residents need to vote for their best interest, and they haven't in the past. And we really missed the bill. Last election, last November, there was a Sue Ellen Staggs that ran against the Lone Star board member. He's one of the quietest of them, and he won. I don't know his name, is why I mentioned his this quietness. So that he won again though. And we really didn't do anything about it. There wasn't a lot of support for Sue Ellen. I think she would have been a better person in that position. So we don't want to do that again. When next election comes around, we should have our slate of candidates and we should do a better job at that. And we talked about, I don't know if someone actually brought it up during the trustee board meeting, but afterwards, I know some people have talked about, do we hire a PR firm? And I kind of loathe that idea myself, because shouldn't we be able to accomplish this ourselves through outreach to the 55 mud directors that are in the Woodlands? I know that people in Creekside can't vote for this Lone Star board, but they should have an interest in this because subsidence would affect them. So just moving forward, how do we change things? Sometimes I'm very encouraged by all the articles that have been in the paper and what I've seen out on social media and people discussing this more. And I think we can go on this course, continue what we're doing. And that's where I'd like to go with it. But that's basically the trustee report and what's going on with all of that. Any questions?
No, just one comment. I mean, I think 50 mud directors talking to people is fine, but, I believe that we should use on serious issues, people who are expert, and marketing and promotion is an expertise. And there are these are learned people who know how to communicate to segments whose votes we will need, and the kind of message that we want to communicate that would be widely, if you will, accepted or received. And I really think we need and have needed for quite a while to engage on a lot of subjects, a formal agreement with a marketing and promotion firm that really has the time and knows what they're doing. We seem to sometimes be doing this on the cheap. Just my comment.
Yeah, I see what you're saying. I think what we have to do is get through to the local political action committees that seem to control the vote with their push cards. When they hand out a push card that says vote for this slate, that's what wins, and that's what we have to change. I think even a talented PR firm would fail if, say, the MCTP and the Texas PAC were to disagree with us on our slate of candidates. So that's unfortunate, but I see what you're saying. Professional.
Well, I will tell you this, the last election that you and I ran in, okay, there was something well above 3,000 votes cast, okay, or voters who actually voted. I think at one point you actually got in the hundreds of votes when you were first elected, mid-hundreds of votes, which was an astounding number of people voting. So there was a methodology that got those votes out there, and it was a mix of things. Not the least of which was the internet, okay, and direct mail. So I just think we should consider it. I think we do a lot of things here on the cheap.
Well, I see what you're saying. Internet and direct mail. Good. Yeah. Okay.
And message. Message is critical too, right?
Right.
Message is critical.
Yeah.
You tell people that, we have the downside of aquifers that our equipment can't pump from, okay, and needs to be replaced, and what it's going to cost them, okay. Fear is a wonderful motivator, by the way.
This is Brian, just one. Yeah, I was going to just mention, and y'all, may already recall, but we do have, as political subdivisions, some significant limitations on being able to spend district funds for election related matters. We're limited to just information, not advocacy. And that's really been a hamstringing effect on actual government entities being involved, and gives a structural advantage to private entities or individuals that are willing to spend money for PACs to be able to go and advocate. So that's been kind of a structural issue for districts, political subdivisions, cities, and whatnot for years, and is one for us on this now. But just to keep in mind as we talk about actual district involvement as opposed to directors in their individual capacities.
Oh, thank you for that input. I understand why they made that law. It gets at what I feel about spending taxpayer dollars on advocacy. So I see why that law exists. Thanks. Yeah.
Right, but that, Brian, you're here to guide us, right? And so if that's something we want to do, there are other ways to do it.
Mhm.
Okay. It represent certain interests. Anyway,
Anthony,
moving on.
before we sign off, I want to point out that Mark Unlin provided some comments at the trustee meeting, and they are in your packet. And I know he's muted for whatever reason tonight, can't speak, but I wanted to share that information will be discussed with our SJRA staff and our audit committee and our group on May the 3rd. So I wanted to make sure that Mark was aware that his comments were received and are being looked at.
You're talking about data regarding subsidence?
Regarding well levels, yeah.
Okay, thank you. Anything else for trustee report?
Laura, do you have
Oh,
anything
no.
else?
No, I don't have anything else. Thanks, guys.
Well, I do have one thing, because I said it at the trustee meeting, and I want to say it again to my colleagues here on this board, is that I recommended to that board that, given the fact that something over $100 billion is going to be potentially in a bill in Congress, that we should get out and hire a consultant to go put our hands out, okay, beg if we have to get whatever it costs, whatever we can get for the things that we consider major in our community. And we really need to get on it now, because I have a suspicion that, I don't know what the number is going to be, but there is going to be a bill, and there's going to be a lot of money. So,
I think that the trustee board, there was a member, and I don't remember which one. It might have been Ron Wilson, but he said he spoke favorably of that, and I think that they were going to consider that on May the 3rd as well.
okay, great.
Yep. Some organizations already have their grants written, right? So they just got to tweak it. Okay, so that concludes the trustee report. And our next item, receive staff update on adding benches in the name of Biff and Arthur.
I did get information from the township that certainly their service qualifies to meet the criteria for a bench. The benches are $900, then the plaque is $200. They have some guidelines on what the plaque can say and the wording. And they asked me a question, and I stumbled a little bit. Are we looking at maybe one bench with a plaque to honor both of those individuals, or two separate benches?
I was thinking 2 benches myself.
It stumped me, so I said I'd clarify that. But yeah, $900 a bench, $200 for the plaque, and they will be looking and coming back with locations. I emphasized that I thought it needed to be in the boundary of Mud 47, so that's what they're focusing on.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you.
So did we move to go forward with the benches, and we're spending our tax dollars on the benches? Is that what's happening here? It's Laura Norton.
Right. So it looks like we're still, we've got costs, and we authorized him to move forward. Was it last meeting or the meeting before? To look for sites and to get a cost, right? So I think
I didn't know.
approved it as well. I'll have to go back and verify.
I don't think we've approved any expenditure, or as far as public funds, but I was just, my information I thought was to go get the data and bring.
Yeah, I thought that last month we left it at, I had made a comment about the fact that when Rosemary Rowe, who was on the I think she was the trustee board president, as well as serving some 30 years on Mud 47, when her bench was built and installed, it was a contribution from the Mud 47 directors that paid for that. So this would be different.
Yep.
Well, Laura, you're correct. I remember Biff asking for board members to contribute, but I don't know who did or who didn't. My statement was that at that time I wasn't receiving the pay because I donated it at all. So, but regardless, I don't think that the stipend would cover the cost either way. That's just another thing to consider. But I mean, truthfully, I'm comfortable with spending MUD funds on these benches for our residents.
Okay.
Okay. So we'll move on then to number 21, discussing matters for placement on future agenda. Does anyone have a topic that they'd like added to next month's agenda?
Nothing more than we've already discussed.
One of the things that I'd like to find out is, on the new metering system, right? There's the front end and then there's the back end. And I'd like to understand, how is our centralized business going to change as we move to a server-based environment and we have access to a variety, I guess, of software functionality that should allow us to be more efficient in a number of areas, as well as more efficient in providing timely information to residents. Be great to have that kind of a presentation, maybe from somebody who's heading this thing up on Jim's staff. And I assume there's financial savings included in that, right?
Okay, so if we could include that for next month. And item number 22, adjournment. I guess I need a motion for that.
I'll move. I'll move.
This is Laura Norton, aye.
All right. All in favor?
Jen,
Aye.
Cynthia, I.
Bye, guys.
And aye. So thank you all. See you
Bye,
next
everybody.
time.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Bye.
you.
Thanks, Anthony.
Can't turn off my glasses before I find the dot.